Hello again. So it's part 2 of watercolor this afternoon. And you can see that I've already got something started here. I've taken the blue painter's tape and I've made like a 1/4 inch margin around the whole outside. And then I used the blue painter's tape to create a tree shape. It's not quite done because there's parts of the tree that I don't need to mask. And I've painted the wash over it already, and it's pretty much dry. I am going to continue to work on this. Obviously, you can see there's a lot missing. The reason why I masked this out is that this is going to be a birch tree. And a birch tree, for those of you who don't know, it comes in 3 different species, and the one that we're going for is the one that's white, a white birch. So as we know, we can't use white in watercolor, so I've masked out the tree shape so I can work with it later on using the white of the paper. That's the bark from the birch tree. So what I've done so far is I've used a couple of the techniques. I've got masking, and I've definitely used a wash in the background. And I always start with the background first because you work background to foreground and light to dark. So the background in this painting, and it's almost a little over half finished just by doing the background first, is I did the sky. And then I did the water in the, whether it's a river or a lake, okay, already, because they're going to be the lightest part of the picture and also the farthest away, aside from the tree. The tree is what I'm basically going to work on last, and this little patch of grass here or land around the tree. I've also used the salt technique on a rock that's kind of offshore here. And you know, this is made up out of my head. The rock kind of bled into the background a little bit, but not a big deal. It's not really dark enough for me to worry about. I'm just gonna get rid of the salt on here. And it didn't make an overly fantastic pattern. I just wanted some kind of texture to kind of guide me along the way with how to turn this into a rock. And as you can see, it's a lighter gray in color, but all I used was watered down black, no white. So even though there was color underneath here, very, very light green and blue in the background, I was able to get kind of that black, light gray over it and then put the salt in it. It did bleed a little bit, as I said. When I did the sky here, I did the wash using kind of a rainbow order, going from purple to blue to green to orange. And I didn't do any red in this one. And then I did the reverse here, orange to yellow to green to blue a little bit. I didn't quite get to the purple. It's not really necessary. It doesn't really matter. I let it just dry for a few minutes, and then I went back into it with some darker colors, and I kind of made some cloud shapes. Just real gentle clouds, kind of like wispy, see-through clouds in this sunset or sunrise, whichever you want it to be. And getting rid of the salt here. What I'm going to do next is, again, I'm going to start working in the background first. So I'm going to put the mountain in. And I don't normally like to have my paintbrushes across the way. So I don't like to have my paintbrushes over my artwork. I usually like them to the side, and that way I can avoid dripping. But because of the way I needed to set up the camera, because of the lighting, it was better this way. And I'm really sorry for the angle. I just don't have a tall enough stand to get over the top here. I've been using the palette top, okay, to mix some colors. And we're going to keep on with some of these colors. And I have my variety of hair brushes from the classroom, except for the big black one. That one's mine. That's the wash brush. But I have all of these are from the classroom, all available when we go back or next year. And I'm going to just do this Purple Mountain Majesty in the background. I'm going to take some water and activate what's in the palette up here, this blue purpley color, and maybe even add some green to it just to make it this kind of grayish purple color. And I'm using just the wet brush, very lightly painting in a mountain shape, a hill, right over the edge of the sky here. So we don't have to worry about any white spaces. And then over here, right through the tree. Add a little more green to it. Kind of mix that together a little bit. Have it come down to the shoreline of whatever is across the way. You know, mountains from a distance because of the atmosphere, which we talked about in Art 1, atmospheric perspective. You know, you don't really see the colors exactly the way they're supposed to look sometimes. You would normally see them kind of diffused by pollution or water droplets in the air, and that's why they don't quite look like the colors that you would normally think of. You know, a hill should be green because of the trees, at least here in New England. Maybe out west they're a little different. And I'm going to add some little bit more details with the darker version of that mixture. The purple and the blue. Ooh, that purple's really strong. A little bit of green. Some of these tops of these mountains in New England, they are what we call above the tree line, and they have a lot of rocky surfaces, and they're kind of cool to hike around. You know, I like to hike. So I'm just kind of adding some interesting details with the just the paintbrush. So I let that dry a little bit, and then I went back into it just like I did up here with the clouds in the sky, just to add a little more variety. And I'm actually going to do the same with this dark green down here. I'm going to make a darker version of this color. Actually change to a smaller brush. Let this bleed a little bit around. Just kind of do its own thing. Once again, this is a characteristic of American style watercolor. Very loose brush strokes, not a lot of detail. And I'm kind of just letting this do its own thing. Spreading around. I'm going to do more to this later on after it dries out a little bit. But I do want the surface, the edge here to be pretty outstanding. So as the colors come towards you, come towards the viewer, they're going to get more and more distinct. So the color and the shape of the objects is going to become more clearly defined. Here close to the shore, I'm going to start with a layer of this blue-green that I just made. Add a little more green to it, maybe some brown. And I'm just going to now paint in the shoreline right over where the tree is. Doesn't have to be perfect, because nothing in nature does have a lot of mathematical things going on, but to the naked eye, unless you really study them, they look pretty irregular and pretty imperfect, which is a pretty good thing for artists, because we get to just kind of go with the flow rather than having to make everything perfect. And again, I'm just going to let that dry for a few minutes. because this is painter's tape, it's not peeling up at all, which is kind of cool because they, you know, we don't want any paint to seep underneath it. Although if you look at a birch tree, it does have a lot of these interesting little lines in it, little vascular lines where the bark is. This is a pretty sturdy piece of the bark, good for craft stuff. That's why I went and grabbed it. I only like to pull the bark off of fallen trees. You should never do that on any live tree. There are people that do know how to take birch bark off of live trees, but it's not something that I actually even want to learn how to do. Oof. But there's people out west that do it where there's more birch trees, of course, but not something I want to learn how to do. Because it's used so much in home decorating for people who like the cabin look or the woodsy look. Okay, I'm going to continue on, just working with that farther shore there. Going to make this even more dark now. And notice I'm putting my arm on the table. This is where we're getting more into a British style. And I'm really going to use the tip of the paintbrush to kind of outline the shore a little bit more. Kind of making a tree line here. Fir trees, they could be deciduous trees. Coniferous, the ones that stay green all year. Going to an even smaller brush. I've changed brushes. Whoop, wrong color. We'll fix it. There we go. One the great thing about coniferous trees and deciduous trees is from a distance, you don't necessarily have to have any kind of basic shape to them. From this distance, they really don't look like anything. Maybe some are taller than others. The points stick up a little more. You might see some branches. But I'm just going to fill that in. Put a few more over here on the other side. Doesn't all have to be pine trees. Can add a little more green here. Make some deciduous. They're more rounded. Painting right over where it's masked. Using this color over and over and over again in my palette. Trying to go as quickly as I can because I don't want this video to last that long. Plus, not necessary. Not with American style watercolor. And this is a study out of my head. Maybe it's a memory of some place that I've been, and I've been to a lot of scenes like this, believe me. Seen this a lot. Okay. Now I'm going to start putting some details in here. Some patches of darker areas. I think they're more brown up close. If there's no leaves on the trees, then we're looking at kind of dead grass type of color. So I'm adding a little yellow into it, into the greenish brown. And I'm going to just spread that around, get a bigger brush. Trying to go quick for you guys. I want to bore you to death. I'm going to work on that rock last because it's something that I really like to do a lot. Is grasses. Let's put another rock here. I have some room. I'm going to water down some black Put a little blue in it. Maybe a little green. Nah, more black. There we go. Now, this rock is very, very misshapen. So, I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to lift that color up. I'm lifting it right out so I can see there's a kind of a weird rock shape happening. One great thing about New England is there's rocks everywhere. You go look at a stone wall, they're everywhere, sticking up out of the ground on any hike you take, where the glacier just scraped everything away and exposed really hard rock underneath. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and I'm going to work around it now with some other colors. Get that yellow, icky brown color going again. A little bit more realistic. So now I'm taking the point of my brush and I'm putting in some marsh grasses just along the edge here, far away. Whoop, that one got a little out of hand. We can change that into a cattail later if you want. Cattails at this time of year are kind of exploded. They're letting out all their seeds and stuff. Whatever they're trying to do to make more cattails. And I would use a really thinner brush to do that, which I'll go back and do later. Ooh, purple. Why do I keep doing that? All right, let's use this purple over here. I'm gonna make a rock that's kind of sticking up over here now. And we'll kind of outline the edge of that. I'm just using that color over and over and over again on the palette. Messing up my yellow a little bit, but we'll clean these out when we're done. Periodically, I clean the ones in the classroom, you know, just because people oops, it's too yellow. Okay, so I'm just kind of using that wet on dry, dry on wet, just putting in some grasses around here. You know, there's plenty of dead grass hanging around this time of year. Doesn't have to be anything spectacular. I'm letting the brush kind of fan out on its own. Right? The tips are kind of coming apart. I'm going to get more specific later on. Put a couple of pieces of grass out in the water using that dry brush technique, where I'm fanning out the brush, and I will come back and enhance this later. I'm really down low looking at this, just so you know. I'm just not on the camera. My eyesight is so bad. Look what happened in the background here. I like how that looks. I'm not going to mess with it anymore. I'm going to leave that as is for now. Is that my small brush? Yeah. I'm going to clean my brush off pretty well. I'm going to take blue and green and purple and some of this color black over here. Yeah. And now I'm going to make some water. And here I'm starting to outline the rock a little bit. Fix up this rock so he's not so... And he's throwing his reflection into the water a little bit. Now let's outline this rock here with more of a rock color. Kind of give him a This guy over here needs a little attention. Could have used the salt over here earlier, didn't think of it. And I'm going to pull, you can see I made an outline. Now I'm going to pull this color out, just spread it around. Kind of let it do its own thing on its own. It didn't work very well. And again, this is the watercolor paper from the classroom. It's nothing spectacular, but it is pretty good to work with these watercolors, the Prang. This might be water here. All these light spots, why not? Little marshy area, although birch trees don't really like to grow in that type of area. They like it to be a little bit drier. But I am gonna go now and start to put in some more grasses. Make these guys a little more distinct. Have some broken ones bending over, going into the water. Boop. Let's go back here to our cattail and make him real tall. Actually, this far away, I don't think cattails would be this tall. But notice I'm doing all of this detail work after the background is done. Going off the paper to just show the tips of the grass. Coming on here. Okay, let's get this masking off. I'm always pulling from the last piece of tape I put on. So I did from thick to thin. And I did try to cut these or tear them so they would look more realistic. I didn't have perfect straight sides, but you know, had other things going on in the house. So you can see the white of the tree. And I'm going to use a brownish black. Actually, I'm going to go get one of my own really small brushes. Yeah, that's a little too small, this one. So these come like this in the classroom too. As you see, there's a plastic protector on here. This is a nylon brush, and it's real stiff. It's not a hair brush. It's made from nylon. So because I do British style watercolor, I need things that are going to keep their shape really well. And this is going to stay intact while I do some of the detail work. The other thing that you can do, rather than if you lose these, which they're a pain in the neck, is you can just use a straw, a plastic straw, and put that over your paintbrushes. So while you have them in your messed up box like I have, they're not going to like crunch each other and get in each other's way. Okay. So now I'm going to kind of outline and put some detail on my birch tree. Birch trees have all kinds of weird things going on them. They're get a lot of like rot, and they have lichen growing on them. You have like parts where the branches break off and they kind of scar over themselves. They tend to get discolored. I like birch trees, though. They're pretty picturesque. They make for good subject matter in a painting. They're really easy to do with the masking. Don't have to worry too much about perfection. And some of the other branches that are coming off at the top, way up high, do not need to be masked because they're so thin, they wouldn't be white yet. But they would be way up top on the smaller branches. And you always stroke up and out, away from the tree itself. I'm going very, very fast. Trying to do this so it's interesting. I'm not going to mess with that anymore. I'm going to use this thin brush while I have it. Kind of spruce up some of my grasses here along the shore. Using that dry on dry technique now. I'm sorry, wet on dry technique. And around the base of the tree, so this is kind of time of year. This is kind of April, March, April. Some things are starting to turn green, but there's really not a lot of flowering plant life, so there's not a lot of pretty colors in terms of flowers or anything on the trees, in terms of leaves or even buds. Just the red maples are out right now. They're fun to paint too because they have really scraggly looks to them. They don't get very, they're not very mathematical. They are, you just don't notice it. Okay, gonna go even farther with my rocks here so they really, really stand out. kind of outlining some of the rock-like aspects. I don't want to do too much detail like I normally do because I'm trying to do the American style. Pull that around. But I want to get the gist to you that I'm working background to foreground, light to dark, large areas to details, and I'm waiting in between to let things dry. I'm not going to go try to do this painting in one class period, right? I'm trying to gauge what I need to do next. If we were doing this in class, I would give you like a few days to get this done, this simple landscape, and I would probably ask you to go take your own picture. It's really easy to do landscapes that are sunsets because a lot of what you're doing is a light sky and then a dark shadowy imprint on it. Okay, just gonna put the little fuzzy things on top of some of these. Or they could be Phragmites, which is a reed. It was in the slideshow that I sent to you guys. Boom. That's all I'm going to do. So I'm actually going to move the camera, and I will try to do it as slowly as possible so you can get a better look. There's one side. And then the other. I'm sorry, there we go. Trying to get a little closer on some of the things I've done. And that's it for today.